Hello, my name is Zachary Ellis. This is my midterm project presentation called Masters of the Mediterranean. It is a comparison between the cultures of the Greeks and Roman Empire. As we can see in the table of contents, my slide topics include the influences of the cultures seen today, literature and writing from both cultures, architecture and sculpture, and philosophy and religion, and it is complemented with a picture of Sophocles. So influences seen today, both cultures are fundamental in Western society. In America is considered Western society in that it is geographically west of Europe and Asia, but also that it was founded by the British, which were European, which were part of the Western Roman Empire. Core Western principles such as democracy and republicanism and free thinking to an extent are still held even higher today than they were in the past, where they were kind of still being pioneered by independent philosophers and maybe schools of thought for the elite. Now they're almost rudimentary and fundamental in our education system and in our general societal beliefs. Construction techniques and some models, when they're used, old-timey, like in DC in particular, has lots of columns and lots of domes and lots of arches, which are very prevalent in Greek architecture for their practicality, but they're also used in Roman architecture because of the Greek influence and more for aesthetic reasons than for necessary reasons. In pop culture, video games, movies, and books still make references heavily to this day of Greek and Roman characters and actual people. The picture I have is of Bologna, who is a character in the game Smite, and Smite actually focuses on different pantheons, and the Romans are one of them, so it uses gods from those pantheons, and Bologna is the figurehead for the Roman pantheon. And the other picture I have is from the movie 300, which is about the Spartan defense from the Persians of 300 soldiers. Movies like Harry Potter, and which is also a book, names use heavy influences like Severus and Albus, which are Latin names, and our language itself is a Roman language, which means it originates from Rome. There are really three main types of Greek literature. We have philosophical works like the Republic by Plato and Metaphysics and Politics by Aristotle, where they have, topics that are kind of wide ranged and kind of arbitrary, and they're more discussions than anything else, but they're kind of written in free form. Or you have structured lyrical and epic poems like Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and those two in particular were fundamental to Greek culture in terms of religion and even probably I would say almost a very archaic version of nationalism in which they took the domination of Troy as their origin story and they kind of ran with it as they were meant to dominate the region. Lyrical poetry isn't really as serious as epic poetry, nor is it as long as it's kind of meant as a pastime and to be played with music, and it's very short and specific and used for a very exclusive event, maybe like a wedding or a public gathering. Greek theater was also very important for them, as it was one of their few public pastimes. But it was also taken very seriously, and it was usually blessed by a priest of Dionysus. There were two main genres. There were comics, which were lighthearted storytelling, and there were tragedies, which usually involved deaths. The three Theban plays, written by Sophocles, are I read them in high school. I read Antigone in particular. So they're rudimentary and fundamental to understanding the basics of what the Greeks held important to them in their culture. Our first comparison of the two shows that the Romans really did take heavy influence from the Greeks in that their poems took two of the three genres that the Greeks had in epics and lyrics, but the Romans also had satires. Virgil is the most well-known epic writer who wrote the Aeneids, and it took elements of both the Odyssey and the Iliad and kind of joined them together into a Latin Roman version, where a Trojan soldier dominates the Italian peninsula. Roman plays also had comedies and tragedies, but lots of Roman plays were based off Greek plays. The playwrights Plautus and Terence were mainly focused on actually kind of converting Greek plays into Roman Latin plays, whereas Seneca was a political writer. who was very prominent, but he criticized uh, dictatorships in favor of the republic. Greek architectural projects were more of a civic kind of duty in that they were used by the public for the public's needs, such as temples for religious reasons, or maybe the Acropolis at Athena for democratic gatherings. They used post and lintel temples, which means that they had one column or a few columns and a lintel or a board resting on top, and that was the foundation for the roof to be held up. The three main styles of columns were Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Doric is the most simple towards the left, where it had straight up and down lines, and the top didn't really have any designs. Ionic is kind of straighter, not as cone-shaped as the Doric, and it had the intricate cartoony kind of swirls at the top, supporting the roof. And Corinthian, which is most favored by the Romans and was used probably the least by the Greeks, was more intricate and more sophisticated and complicated, and was also kind of the prettiest of the three. The Romans took heavy influence even in architecture from the Greeks, but they kind of did put their own twist on things. They used arches much more than the Greeks did, and their use of columns was more for aesthetic than for the actual required support. Developments like aqueducts and bridges expressed technological advancements that the Greeks hadn't quite reached, and even some technologies like concrete were beyond the Greeks were capable of. But the sculpture and design of some buildings were used as propaganda. Forts in particular were sites where many citizens would go, and the emperor or maybe political strategists would take advantage of this and put things like the column of Trajan, which is to the right, and depicting something like a military victory to kind of garner the support and approval of the general people. Also, at the beginning of my presentation, I had a picture of a statue of Julius Caesar, and it uses idolistic symbols such as the dolphin to also express his dominance and almost support of the gods to be in the position he's in. Greek religion is famously polytheistic, having titans and very iconic gods and goddesses who were in control of very specific attributes, like Zeus being the god of lightning and Aphrodite being the goddess of love. But they also held legends like Hercules and the stories of Homer's epics in high regard, taking them almost into a level just as high up as their religion. In terms of philosophy, their ancient religion focused on materialistic topics like the notion of existence and maybe the elements, whereas later philosophers focused on internal morals and human developments. The big three, Sophocles, Plato, and Aristotle, were all interconnected in that Plato was the student of Sophocles and Aristotle was the student of Plato. And Sophocles came in direct conflict with one of the early of the late schools of thoughts called the Sophists, who believed that there was a personal truth and that it could exist in tandem with an objective or direct truth. Roman religion was also polytheistic, but it did have its own attributes. The conversion from Greek goddess to Roman goddess wasn't nearly as clean all the time, but it was still there, like Jupiter being the equivalent of Zeus. But the Romans also had gods like Bellona, which was a complete sex change for the god of war, who was Ares in the Greek. Roman philosophy incorporated Epicureanism, which was the belief that destiny was essentially didn't exist, and that a person's life was in their own control. Lucretius was famously known for saying that gods do not determine destiny. And Roman Stoicism was a school of thought following duty and the belief that if you take care of yourself, then nothing else should matter to you. And it was followed by Marcus Aurelius, who was a famous emperor writing a book during a time of war. And a large part of their philosophy is obviously political, supporting the need for an empire with an emperor and almost mitigating the importance of the republic, but still supporting it enough that it needs to exist. In conclusion, the Romans took heavy influence from the Greeks, but in their larger scale added their own flair with new unique attributes. But both civilizations are the foundation of Western society today, and upon their reflection, we see our own similarities with their own.